Welcome to Stories of Slumber, a quiet place where history softens and the ancient world returns in gentle whispers. Now, let us get into today's story of the king who invented law and order, Hammurabi. The story of Hammurabi begins almost 4,000 years ago, around 1792 BCE, in a land called Mesopotamia. This land lay between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, in the area we now call Iraq. It was a warm land, rich with farms, canals, and busy cities. People worked as farmers, traders, builders, priests, and soldiers. Life was full, but it was also uncertain. Babylon, the city Hammurabi ruled, was not the great and powerful place we imagine today. When he first became king, Babylon was small. Other cities nearby were stronger. Some of the rulers of these cities were enemies, and some were only pretending to be friends. Hammurabi lived in a world where life changed quickly. Floods could destroy farms. Drought could dry canals. A small fight between neighbours could turn into a much bigger problem. People often argued over land, water, debts, and trade deals. Justice depended on where you lived and who judged your case. One city might punish a crime harshly, while another gave only a small fine. This uneven world is what Hammurabi inherited. And this is where the mystery begins. The mystery of what does it truly mean to create order in a world that never stops changing?
Before Hammurabi became famous for his laws, he was simply a young prince in a small but hopeful city. Babylon was not yet a great power. In those early years, Hammurabi grew up watching the daily life of his people. He saw farmers waking before sunrise to lift water from the canals, hoping their fields would survive another season. He saw merchants arguing over the weight of silver or the quality of grain. He watched priests perform long rituals, asking the gods for protection, rain or luck, and he saw disagreements everywhere. A line drawn in a field, a borrowed ox returned with a broken leg, a clay tablet claiming a debt, a widow asking for her share of land. Nothing was simple. Every dispute carried fear and frustration. Every judgment depended on who you knew or where you lived. Babylon had customs, but not a unified system. The laws in one neighbourhood were not the same as the laws in another. Different judges used different traditions. As a child, Hammurabi must have noticed how often people walked away from judgment feeling confused or cheated. He may have watched his father, King Sin-Muballit, listen to petitions from citizens who felt they had been treated unfairly in another court. These moments likely stayed with him, forming questions inside him, long before he had the power to change anything. When Hammurabi took the throne in 1792 BCE, he did not receive a strong kingdom. He received a fragile one. Neighbouring cities, like Larsa, Eshnunna, and Mari were stronger, richer, and more confident. Some demanded tribute, some controlled important canals and trade routes. If Babylon wanted to survive, it needed stability, it needed unity, and it needed a leader who could see past short-term problems. Hammurabi began his rule quietly, not with grand wars but with careful repairs. He strengthened the city's walls to protect it from sudden attacks. He cleared canals and built new ones so farmers could rely on steady water. He restored temples to earn the trust of priests and citizens alike. But even as he worked on these visible tasks, a deeper problem remained hidden beneath the surface. The kingdom was growing, slowly at first and then more quickly through alliances and early victories. And with every new region that joined Babylon, more legal traditions arrived. Each city had its own ways of handling land disputes, marriages, contracts, and crime. Soon Hammurabi faced the same question his father faced before him, but on a much larger scale. How do you hold a growing kingdom together if every part of it follows different rules? One can imagine him sitting with scribes late into the night, listening to reports from judges across the region. These reports showed a kingdom that looked united on maps but felt divided in daily life. There were early challenges. Some officials resisted change because it threatened their power. Some cities did not want to give up their local customs. Some judges felt insulted by the idea that the king might set rules above their traditions. But Hammurabi kept listening and gathering information. He sent trusted officials to investigate complaints. He asked scribes to record especially difficult cases. He studied how earlier kings in other lands had tried to create stable systems. The idea of a unified legal code did not appear in one moment. It grew slowly as he listened to more people, heard more problems, and watched how different regions behaved. There may have been a turning point, a moment that pushed him from thinking about fairness to deciding he must carve it into stone. Whatever the moment was, it stayed with him, and it made him understand something important. A kingdom could not survive on shifting rules. It needed clear laws that everyone could see. It needed justice strong enough to unite people during calm years and guide them during hard ones. Hammurabi knew this would not be easy. He would have to gather laws from many places. He would have to choose which traditions remained and which ones changed. He would have to think about every part of life: trade, farming, family, property, injury, crime, contracts, and more. He would also have to decide whether he had the right to do this, whether he could truly speak for justice itself. And so the idea of the Code of Hammurabi began, not with a carving, not with a monument, but with long nights, careful listening, and a growing belief that justice needed a strong foundation. This was the beginning of the journey that would shape his legacy, and it began not with power, but with the fear that his kingdom would fall apart without clear and fair laws. As the years passed, Hammurabi's responsibilities grew heavier. His kingdom expanded through careful diplomacy, at first and later through battles he could not avoid. With every new city that came under his rule, the problem of uneven justice became clearer. People followed him as king, but they did not all follow the same rules. He understood that armies could win land, but only laws could keep it united. In the early part of his reign, Hammurabi focused on building trust. He sent messages to distant cities saying he wanted peace and stability. He travelled within his kingdom to meet local leaders, listen to their concerns, and understand their customs. People began to speak of him as a king who cared about order. These small, steady actions made Babylon's influence grow even before its armies did. But as his territory grew, new problems emerged. Different groups argued about land borders. Merchants from different cities disagreed about trade rules. Families brought their disputes from one region to another, and judges struggled to know which customs to follow. One can imagine Hammurabi's officials returning to him, tired and frustrated. They might have explained that a case settled in Babylon was handled differently in another city. They might have warned that people were confused about which rules applied to them. Hammurabi likely understood that these problems were not temporary. They were signs of a kingdom that needed one voice, one set of laws, one shared understanding of right and wrong. This thought grew stronger as the political situation around Babylon changed. The major powers in Mesopotamia began shifting. Some kings weakened, others fought each other, alliances broke apart. Opportunities appeared, but so did dangers. Hammurabi moved carefully. He formed alliances when they helped him, and stepped away from them when they became risky. He watched other kingdoms argue and fall. Slowly, city by city, he strengthened Babylon's position. During this rise, one thing became clear. The larger his kingdom became, the more urgent the need for a universal code of laws. There were moments that pushed him forward, a dispute between two cities over a canal that supplied them both. A conflict when a merchant from one region traded in another and was treated unfairly. A court case in a newly conquered city that contradicted the judgment he would have given in Babylon. Each event reminded him that unity required clarity. So Hammurabi began to plan. He ordered scribes to gather older laws from Sumer, Akkad, and other kingdoms. He asked officials to bring him reports of the most common disputes. He studied the judgments he had given over the years to see what patterns emerged. He considered how different parts of his kingdom lived. Farmers, traders, priests, families, workers, and soldiers. The idea of the law code became stronger, more defined. Not just a list of punishments, but a steady guide for life in a growing empire. People began to sense this change. Judges understood that new rules were coming. Merchants felt hopeful that trade would become easier. Families believed that disputes might soon be settled the same way everywhere. But there was also worry. Some leaders feared losing their local power. Some cities did not want to give up old customs. Some judges felt uncomfortable with the thought of being held to a strict standard. Even so, Hammurabi continued forward. He was no longer just a king of Babylon. He was becoming the creator of a system that aimed to bring order to a world full of changing borders and shifting loyalties. The next step would not be simple. Gathering the laws was one thing, shaping them into a single code was another. Carving them into a stone for everyone to see was something greater still. This moment, when planning became action, marked the true beginning of Hammurabi's most famous achievement. The first major moment that showed Hammurabi's power and the importance of fairness in his rule came during his long conflict with the kingdom of Larsa. Larsa was one of the strongest cities in southern Mesopotamia. For many years, it controlled important canals, rich farmland, and busy trade routes. When Hammurabi first became king, Larsa was far stronger than Babylon. It watched Babylon closely, sometimes acting like an ally, sometimes like a threat. For years, Hammurabi managed the situation with careful diplomacy, but slowly things began to change. The king of Larsa, Rim-Sin, had ruled for many decades. His strength was fading. This created a moment that Hammurabi could not ignore. One year, a group of cities approached Hammurabi for help. They complained that Larsa was demanding too much tribute and controlling water in unfair ways. They explained that Larsa's officials were using water as a tool to punish or pressure them. Hammurabi listened to these complaints. He told his advisors that a kingdom could not be stable if water was controlled unfairly. He also knew that if he helped these cities, they might support Babylon in the future. Some of his advisors warned him to be careful. But Hammurabi felt that the time had come to act. He believed that justice in the region depended on stopping the unfair control of water, so he made a decision. Records tell us that around 1763 BCE, Hammurabi joined several cities in an alliance against Larsa. Together, they began to push back. Hammurabi organized his soldiers and moved south. It was not quick. It was not easy. For months, they marched through hot plains, crossing old canal systems and dusty farmlands. They secured towns one by one, weakening Larsa's defenses. Along the way, Hammurabi ordered officials to inspect broken canals and blocked waterways. He wanted to understand how deeply the problems went. These officials returned with troubling reports. Some canals had been diverted, some were poorly maintained, and some systems favoured one group over another. As Babylon's forces approached Larsa, Rim-Sin tried to hold the city, but the alliances that once supported him had weakened. Hammurabi's slow, steady approach had worked. His allies felt respected, not controlled. His enemies felt pressure but not cruelty, and the people of the region began to see him as a ruler who brought structure instead of chaos. He knew that if Babylon wins this city, he would inherit all its laws, traditions, disputes, and responsibilities. It is not just a military victory he is preparing for, but a legal one. Hammurabi instructed his men to cut off supplies and guard the canals. He wanted to avoid unnecessary destruction. He believed that a conquered city should not be broken beyond repair, because its people needed to return to normal life as soon as possible. After a period of pressure, Rim-Sin's hold collapsed. Larsa fell. Hammurabi entered the city not with celebration, but with a sense of duty. He walked through its streets, seeing the crowded homes, the markets filled with worried traders, and the canals that needed repair. Later records say that he told the officials of Larsa that he did not come to destroy their traditions, but to bring fair leadership. He explained that he expected justice to be equal for everyone in his empire. They understood that this meant change, but it also meant stability, something they had not felt in a long time. This victory was important for many reasons. It gave Babylon control of the southern region. It secured major trade and water routes. It made Hammurabi one of the strongest rulers in Mesopotamia. But something deeper happened as well. This event showed him how much people depended on predictable laws. It showed him how quickly things fell apart when rules were unclear or abused. It showed him that a strong kingdom needed more than walls and soldiers. It needed fairness. This moment, the fall of Larsa, became one of the steps that pushed Hammurabi toward creating his famous code. After seeing the chaos in the region, he knew more strongly than ever that justice had to be written clearly and followed equally across all lands. After the fall of Larsa, Hammurabi's power grew quickly. Cities that once doubted him now sent messengers to his palace in Babylon. They wanted protection, trade, and stability. But with this new strength came a new challenge, managing different regions that now depended on him. One of the clearest examples of his growing responsibility came during his conflict with the kingdom of Mari. Mari was a well-known city to the northwest, near the Euphrates River. It was famous for its grand palace and its many clay tablets, which recorded everything from trade to dreams. Its king, Zimri-Lim, had once been Hammurabi's ally. They fought together against Larsa. They shared information. They exchanged gifts. But alliances in ancient Mesopotamia rarely stayed stable for long. After Larsa fell, the balance of power shifted. Hammurabi became the most influential king in the region. Some allies accepted this new reality. Others felt threatened. Mari began to worry. Its leaders did not want Babylon controlling both the south and the trade routes in the north. Rumours spread that Zimri-Lim's advisors were encouraging cities to resist Hammurabi. Some officials suggested that Mari wanted to limit Babylon's influence. Others believed Mari was secretly supporting groups that did not want Hammurabi's laws in their region. At first, Hammurabi tried to maintain peace. He sent messages to Mari asking for cooperation and reminders of their past alliance. Mari responded politely, but behind those polite messages was growing fear. But merchants travelling between Babylon and the northern cities complained that officials near Mari were placing heavy taxes on goods passing through. These taxes were higher than what Hammurabi had agreed upon earlier. Merchants reported that some caravans were delayed for days and others were turned back without clear explanations. Hammurabi took these reports seriously. He also understood that if he allowed this behaviour to continue, other cities might follow, and his growing order would fall apart. So he sent envoys to Mari. They were told to speak calmly but firmly. They carried tablets explaining that trade must be treated fairly and that no city should take advantage of merchants for its own gain. The envoys returned with mixed results. Mari claimed it needed money for its own security. It claimed that the taxes were not new, just adjusted. It claimed that Babylon was becoming too powerful too quickly. The situation grew worse when a group of merchants arrived in Babylon with alarming news. They explained that a disagreement over taxes had turned into an argument, and one of the merchants was struck by a guard. This moment made Hammurabi stop and think. He knew trade disputes could turn into large conflicts. He knew a single violent incident could spread fear across hundreds of kilometres. He also knew that Mari still held influence with several northern cities. He faced a difficult choice: try again to restore peace through words, or take action to protect the stability he had built. History tells us that around 1761 BCE, Hammurabi chose action. He gathered his army and moved toward the north. This one was not simply about land, it was about control of the entire region's future. When Hammurabi approached Mari, he found the city strong but uncertain. The palace was grand, famous for its size and its thousands of rooms, but political stability inside it had begun to crack. Zimri-Lim had lost some support. His advisors disagreed about how to respond to Babylon's rising power. This division weakened Mari. The city fell to Hammurabi's forces, and what happened next became one of the most well-known events of his reign. Mari was destroyed. Its palace was burned. Its archives were scattered. Hammurabi chose to remove the city not because he wanted glory, but because he believed it threatened the unity of the region. It was a hard decision with lasting consequences. People fled. Merchants sought new paths. Families from Mari feared what would happen next. But Hammurabi had a reason that connected directly to his larger mission. He believed that laws could not survive if large, powerful cities worked against them. He believed that trade had to remain open and fair. He believed that justice and safety required removing threats that weakened stability. This event was one of the clearest moments that shaped the final form of his law code. He had seen how quickly unfair taxes caused conflict. He had seen how alliances changed without warning. He had seen how a strong kingdom could begin to crumble when trust was broken. Mari's fall taught him something important. Order needed to be more than force. It needed to be written and permanent. And that is why Mari's destruction became another step toward the creation of Hammurabi's code. There is another moment from Hammurabi's reign that shows the peak of his power, but also hints at the challenges that would come later. After several expansions of the Babylonian Empire, Hammurabi ordered work on a long canal called the Hammurabi Canal. It stretched across fields and linked important towns. History tells us that during this time a serious problem occurred. A section of the canal bank broke. Fields were flooded, homes were damaged, livestock was lost. People believed the damage was caused by neglect of the official responsible for maintaining the canal. This became a major test for Hammurabi and for the system he was building. Before his code, cases like this would have been handled differently in each city. But now Hammurabi wanted one approach, one understanding of responsibility. So he travelled to the damaged area and listened to the complaints. He asked the workers to explain what happened. He asked the official in charge what he had done. He asked the inspectors whether the canal had been properly maintained. Their answers revealed the truth. The official had failed in his duty. His neglect caused real harm. This could have been handled quietly, behind palace walls. But Hammurabi understood that justice had to be visible. So he applied a rule that would later appear in his code. If a canal worker or official allowed water to escape through neglect, they were responsible for all the damage. This decision sent a clear message across the kingdom. Justice was not only about punishing crimes, it was about protecting people from carelessness. As Hammurabi stood beside the damaged canal, he saw the relief on people's faces. This moment became important evidence that the law code he was shaping was not just an idea. It was practical. It was needed. It was something people could trust. And yet this event also showed Hammurabi something else, a truth that would follow him into the later years of his reign. The bigger the kingdom became, the more mistakes could happen. The more people depended on him, the heavier the burden of keeping everything fair. And the stronger Babylon grew, the more others would challenge that strength. Even at his peak, Hammurabi saw hints of the pressure that would one day begin to wear down his empire. But for now, the people saw a king who listened. This was the height of his rule, a moment when both his power and his principles aligned. A moment when the idea of a written law code became not just helpful, but necessary. After Hammurabi reached the height of his power, the kingdom changed. It was now large, spread out, and full of many different people. Each city had its own history, each region had its own problems, and all of them expected the king to guide them. For many years, Hammurabi had the strength and energy to meet these expectations. He travelled, he judged cases, he inspected canals, he listened to complaints, he worked to keep everything balanced. But as he grew older, this became harder. The regions far from Babylon began to struggle. Hammurabi tried to keep control through letters and orders. But even with these instructions, he could not be everywhere at once. Small cracks began to appear in the empire, and though they were not obvious at first, they slowly widened. Another challenge came from outside. Neighbouring groups watched Babylon's rise with concern. They had seen Hammurabi defeat Larsa. They had seen him conquer Mari. They had seen him take control of major rivers and trade routes. Now that he was older, they believed Babylon might be easier to challenge. New alliances formed against him. Rival kings tried to regain lost land. Trade routes were threatened by raids. Border regions became tense again. Hammurabi still gave orders, but the energy of his earlier years was gone. He was no longer the young ruler who travelled across the land inspecting fields and canals. He now relied more on his officials, hoping they would carry out his vision with care. And through all this, the laws he had carved, the code that was meant to keep everything steady, were sometimes ignored or misunderstood in faraway regions. Toward the very end of his life, the pressure on the empire became clear. Some cities began pushing back against Babylon's control. Some regions faced famine. Others faced local conflicts that the government struggled to manage. And although the empire did not collapse immediately, the signs of decline were unmistakable. Hammurabi had built something extraordinary, but he also created something so large and complex that no single person could maintain it forever. This was the quiet truth of his final years. Greatness brought challenges as heavy as the victories that created it, and even the strongest king could not escape the weight of time. Hammurabi died around 1750 BCE. The empire he built was still standing. Its cities were still active, its canals still carried water, its people still remembered the strong king who had brought them together. But without his leadership, things changed quickly. His son succeeded him, but he did not have the same strength, patience, or vision. He inherited a kingdom that was large, complex, and already beginning to weaken at the edges. Rival powers that had stayed quiet during Hammurabi's rule now saw an opportunity. They challenged Babylon's authority. They attacked border regions. They encouraged rebellions in distant cities. Within a few decades, the Babylonian empire that Hammurabi had created began to break apart, and new kingdoms rose in places that once answered to Hammurabi. But something surprising happened. Even though the empire weakened, Hammurabi's laws did not disappear. The stone stele with his code carved into it remained standing. People continued to read it. Judges continued to use it. Scribes copied parts of it onto clay tablets. His empire faded, but his idea of justice did not. Years later, when new rulers came to Babylon, they found his laws and used them to guide their own rule. Generations passed. Languages changed. Cities rose and fell. But the idea that laws should be written and visible stayed alive. Centuries after Hammurabi, the great empire of the Assyrians collected old laws. Later, during the Neo-Babylonian period, his name appeared again in records, showing that people still remembered him. Long after that, when the Persians controlled the region, they kept many local traditions, including forms of law inspired by earlier codes. But perhaps the most remarkable part of his legacy came much, much later. In 1901, French archaeologists digging in what is now Iran discovered the original stele with Hammurabi's code carved into it. It had been taken long ago as war treasure by another king. For centuries it lay forgotten under the soil. When it was found, the world finally saw his work again. The tall black stone, the carved images, the long list of laws, the idea of fairness made solid and permanent. Today that stone stands in the Louvre Museum in Paris. People walk past it every day. They read the laws that were written thousands of years ago. They learn about a king who believed justice should not depend on chance. And so, although the empire Hammurabi built is gone, something of him remains. Not the walls, not the armies, not the cities, but the idea that laws should guide people, protect them, and treat them equally. It is an idea that outlived the kingdom that created it. An idea that travelled across time even when everything else faded away. If you loved this story, please let us know of what really impressed you about the story. For more such stories, subscribe to Stories of Slumber.